Mayong hapon. Good afternoon. Hi! Hello! Okay. Di ba? Narinig niyo pa ako dyan sa likod? Pakitaas ko rin mamay. Yes. How about dito sa likod? Ayan. Buhay na buhay pa. Okay. Ang ikukwento ko po is about the big fishes na kumakain nakakakain ng plastic. Kaya nang sabi nga ni Sir Long kanina dun sa likod, mukhang kulang yata yung discussion kasi hindi na pag-usapan yung tungkol sa plastic na tao. And by extension, paano kaya kung yung plastic na tao makakain ng isda na may plastic? May epekto kaya yun? I don't know, dissertation siguro. Anyway, before I go on to my topic, okay lang po ba ikwento ko yung name ko? Parang po doon sa mga nakarinig, pakitakpan na lang po yung name. Okay, is it okay? Quickly lang po, kasi again, as I always mention in my talks, kadalasan kasi yung tinatanong sa akin, hindi yung talk ko, kundi yung name ko after my talk. Okay. My full name is Mudjekeewis Santos. May kwento po yan. Ayan ang sabi ko, Santos is Spanish word for saint. So ako po ay isang santo. Santo. My middle name, my mother's maiden name is Dalisay. Hindi po totoo yung chismis na ako si Cardo Dalisay. Ang totoo po niya, pag minsan buo po kami. Kaya kitang-kita po yung semblance. Pwede? Ayaw? Now, Dalisay is a Tagalog word for pure. So ako po ay isang saint na pure. Ayan. Now, but wait, there's more. What about Mudjekeewis? Well, Mudjekeewis is a Native American Indian name, taken from the poem written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Dahil Native American Indian name siya. By the way, ang name po ang title po ng poem is Song of Hiawatha. Okay? Pero hindi po yung sa name lang, wala po sa genes, wala po sa blood. No? Ang tatay ko po ay puro Kapampangan. Ang nanay ko naman ay Tondo girl. Ayan. Mudjekeewis, siya po yung tatay ni Hiawatha. Dahil Native American Indian name siya, may ibig sabihin din po siya. Ibig sabihin ay God of Ways. Kaya ako po ay isang saint na pure na Diyos. Diba? Kaya nung banggitin ko yan sa Japan, I studied in Japan for my master's and PhD. Sabi nung isang scholar doon, sabi, kaya pala malakas ang arrive mo. Kung sa Tagalog kaya pala mahangin ka. Now, yung nasa taas, inalaw niya pa po akong dagdagan yung aking pangalan. May extension, may PhD. Alam niyo po bang pangalan? Ibig sabihin ng PhD? Alam niya, puro hangin ang dala. Kaya ako na po talaga ang hari ng hangin. Wala pang palakpakan dyan. Okay, but you can call me Muji or Doc Muji. Okay, talking points. I'm going to talk about these guys. Kilala niyo po ba sila? Kita niyo mga tambakol, mga sugi, no? I'm going to talk about these marine organisms that lives in the pelagic zone. Ito yung water column ng open ocean. So, ito po yung nakatira sa open ocean, no? And kadalasan, these are large marine organisms na highly migratory and transboundary. So, they move from country to another country kasi nga highly migratory yung kanilang biology and behavior. Okay? So, dahil ang masabi ko, merong dyan, no? May mga pating, no? May mga balyena, may mga lumba-lumba. By the way, ito pong nasa kaliwang side, ano po yan? Yung may stripe. That's a whale shark, butanding. Ano po ang whale shark? Whale or shark? Kasi may marine mammals tayo at may mga fishes dito sa So is it a whale or a fish? Wow, mahusay kayo Magaling yung inyong teacher. Tama, it's a shark, it's not a whale. Kailangan sabihin na whale shark because it's big. Okay, but it's a fish. Okay. By the way, I'm a little bit known about my work on the small pelagics, no, sa sardines, and recently dun sa tawilis, na-interview kasi ng continuity ng bankers. But I did a lot of work also on these large organisms. In fact, my first assignment when I entered the Bureau of Fisheries in 1995, ang in-assignment ko sa akin ng boss ko si Noel Barro is to work on marine mammals. And I was part of the first interagency task force of marine mammals in the Philippines, which started all the management and research of these animals. Okay, so why do we have to talk about them? First, of course, they are a food source. Tama po ba? Sinong hindi po nakakain na dito ng canned tuna? Or do you know, hindi nyo po ba alam yung, ano yun, yung panga? Belly? Sashimi? No? Yan po, ang sources na natin dyan ay ang ating mga tuna. So they're really very important, no? In terms of our food sources. They also provide livelihood for our fisher folks and our fishermen. In fact, it generates billions of pesos of economy for these communities. No? As you can see there, kita niyo yung mga pahinante na nagbubuhat sa Jensen Market, and even yung mga ecotourism programs natin, marami dyan ay mga whale watching, whale shark watching, and dolphin watching, which provides livelihood to our fisher folk. They are actually part of our national symbol. Have you seen the back of your 100 peso bill? Kids, nakita niyo na ba yung likod ng inyong 100 peso bill? Ang nakalagay dyan ay botanje. And of course, why do we have to talk about them? Like us people, they are also what we call stakeholders in this planet. No? Sabi nga ni Darren kanina, iisang planeta lang tayo. So, and kasama sila dapat sa usapin. No? Maaaring hindi sila nakakapagsalita, pero sometimes bumabawi sila. Sila naman yung medyo nangangagat sa atin. Pero, did you know that how many sharks we kill in a day or in an hour? I think it's hundreds of thousands of sharks a day in the world. And ang napapatay na o nadidisgrasya lang ng mga sharks, so just 100 people or less in a year. But we kill 6.
6 people die a year.
6 people die a year.
150 people die in the Philippines tungkol sa lupi.
Yes. But sharks, we kill hundreds and thousands of them in a day. So, sino ang dihado? Actually sila. Now, so how many species so far based on the definition of large oceanic pelagics? No? We have oceanic tunas, yung mga tambakol, bariles, kulyasan. We have about at least 8 species of them. Billfishes, yung mga malasugi, liplipan. We count about 5 species at least present in the country. Sharks and rays, the big ones, not including the small ones that are coastal. We have about at least 10 species of pating, pagi, butanting. Whales and dolphins, mga balyena at lumba-lumba na across boundaries, about 20 species, almost all of them. 28 species po ang ating record ng whales and dolphins sa country. And of course, lahat po ng 5 marine turtles na recorded sa Philippines are all highly migratory and oceanic. Okay? Now, this figure was popularized by Daniel Pauly in the 1980s. He called it fishing down the marine food webs. And kung mapapansin nyo, what this means is that from the plankton will be eaten by the small fish, and the small fish will be eaten by the larger fish, etc., etc., until you reach the top column. And if you look at this figure, may net dyan. Pag nag-fishing ka, alin mo yung unang makukuha? Yung malalaki, these large ones. And so, in a way, they are indicators. Kung wala na kayo nakikitang sharks and large fishes sa areas ninyo, what that means is that hindi na maganda o hindi na healthy yung fishing ground or yung ecosystem because you're now actually already fishing the smaller fishes. In fact, gusto ko na nga sanang palitan ito. Lagyan ko na siguro ng plastics, doon sa paligid. Kasi yung plastic, kinakain na ng maliit na isda and then so forth and so forth until nakakain na natin. Okay. Now, just quickly, some definition of terms in terms of fisheries parlance. We term overfishing as the fishing rate which is higher than the maximum sustainable yield. I have to mention this because later when we look at their standards, these definitions are very important. And then overfished state means that overfishing has occurred and hindi na siya makapag-produce ng maximum sustainable yield. Meaning, hindi na makabalik yung population into such magnitude that we can still produce the maximum sustainable yield. So that means overfished na. Hindi na pwedeng bumalik yung stocks. Okay? So, let us look at, by the way, in the fisheries, there are 4 types of overfishing. One is growth overfishing, where you fish a lot of the babies. It's like that one. Or recruitment overfishing. What you target are the mothers, the nanays, the bubuntis, the mga anak. And then we do have ecosystem overfishing. It's a combination of growth, recruitment, and habitat degradation, and economic overfishing where you derive smaller profits from the fisheries because you fish the smaller ones rather than the big ones. And all of these things are actually happening in the country. Kaya pag titignan natin mamaya yung status nila, hindi na tayo masyado magtataka kung bakit ang state ng fisheries ng Pilipinas and even ng mundo is really in crisis. Okay, so ano na yung status nila? Okay? I'm going to show you reports of 4 international conventions. Bakit hindi results ng studies sa Philippines? It's simply because these organisms are highly migratory. Yung distribution nila malaki. So it doesn't make sense that we do stock assessment in the Philippines lang. And so, number 1 would be the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission. Alam niyo po ba ito? This is actually the old Tuna Commission. Now, the Philippines is signatory to this commission. And maraming conservation and management efforts na ginagawa nito. The Philippines need to comply to sustainably manage these large oceanic species. And kung mapapansin niyo, medyo malabo. Ang convention area would be from the Philippines, Indonesian side up to Central Pacific. Okay? So, and the WCPFC, again, which the Philippines is a member, has a scientific provider, the South Pacific Commission. And the South Pacific Commission computes for the status of these covered organisms. Okay? And as you can see here, as an example, they collect data from the different countries in the WCPFC, and they compute for rate of fishing mortality, spawning aggregation, catch, etc., etc. And then they come up with an assessment and an analysis. Okay? And then that's the data that is discussed by the commission to make decisions. So, as you can see here, Big Eye Tuna, for example, in this Western and Central Pacific Ocean, they say it's not yet overfished and overfishing is not yet occurring. Although, medyo skeptical ako dun sa Big Eye Tuna kasi what we know is not, there is decrease. What we're saying is that there is decline in population, but they're saying it's not yet overfishing and it's not yet overfished based on the definition of maximum sustainable yield. That's why I had to make that definition. Okay, but then Pacific Bluefin Tuna, Northern Pacific Marlin, the Oceanic White-Tip, and the Silky Sharks all are overfished. So what we are saying is that these species cannot go back to cannot produce again the maximum sustainable levels. Hindi na siya makakabalik, tapos na. Wala na. Okay? Now, another convention, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN. This one, the Philippines is not a member because this is an international NGO. But the method of assessing species, the Philippines is adopting it. In fact, it is in the Wildlife Act. It is in our laws. We can use their method of assessing status of species. Okay? And it measures extinction risk. Kung magiging extinct na ba sila o wala pa. In the Philippines, we just started forming the Philippine Aquatic Red List Committee. This is under the law. And we will do national assessments using the IUCN Red List framework. But, and the categories in the IUCN, it's either not evaluated, data deficient, least concerned. These are species that have been evaluated and they're happy, meaning they're okay. But then you go up to near threatened, and then the threat categories, you look at vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and then extinct. Now, how do you now put species in these categories? The IUCN uses criteria. We have five criteria that we use. I just showed here 1 and 2 criteria. A, we looked at population decline, and 2, area of occurrence. And then it's the scientists, the experts on this particular species who sits down, do a focus group discussion, look at the data, look at the publication, and then decide which category the species belong. Okay, so you want to see the species that are in the IUCN Red List, global assessment. So sa Big Eye Tuna, nakalagay dyan, no? Yung tambakol na Big Eye ay vulnerable. So there's a difference in assessment between the South Pacific Commission and the IUCN. Okay, so vulnerable na siya, ang Big Eye Tuna. Yellowfin, the Pacific Bluefin tuna is also vulnerable. Many of them are near threatened. The oceanic white tips, marlin, and the silky shark are all vulnerable. The makos are endangered, including the whale shark and the shortfin mako. Okay? But the message here is that if you look at the IUCN assessment, many of these large oceanic pelagics are either near threatened or vulnerable in danger. So, ganun lang po yung status nila. Ganun din ang whales and dolphins, endangered. Marine turtles are all endangered, one's critically endangered, and the ocean sunfish, or yung mola-mola, is actually vulnerable. Okay, another convention, yung CITES, I don't know if you have heard that one, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. Now, under our laws, under Philippine laws, pag na-list dito sa appendix ito, it's automatically protected. It's banned. It's considered endangered. Okay? Now, there's an animal committee and a plant committee, scientists that look at the data, but species are put into the appendices by way of votation ng countries. So, yung IUCN is very scientific. Yung WCPFC, may scientific committee na nag-a-analyze. This one is more on political, yung entry ng species dun sa list. So in the CITES appendices, we have 1, 2, 3 in the Philippines. It doesn't matter. Pag nalista sa CITES, it's automatically protected. So, cetacea, lahat po ng lumba-lumba ay nakalista dyan sa CITES. So sa Philippines, lahat ay endangered. Protected. Lahat po ng whales ay protected. Lahat po ng hammerhead sharks are now considered endangered and protected. And then, even the great white shark, etc., etc. And Ricodon, and even the sawfishes. Hindi ko na lang papakita ito. Okay? So, again, using this CITES criteria, many of these large oceanic pelagics are already endangered. And lastly, the International Whaling Commission, which is, before we were, the Philippines is a member of this one, pero ngayon hindi na kasi mahal yung bayad. So we opted na hindi naman lang mag-member. Isa pa, Wala naman tayo masyado ng work in this one in terms of policy because it's already fully protected, but they do count the number of animals in the IWC. And in this case, yung North Pacific na humpback whale, they think its best estimate is about 22,000 individuals remaining. And we do have humpback whales in northern Philippines. Pero hanggang dun lang sila, hindi sila bumababa. Okay, just quickly, my lab's contributions to all the studies of these species, no? And if you may, these are the recent trends that we looked at. Firstly, in 2012, we did publish a paper helping to identify the small yellowfin and big eye because we had a problem in terms of statistics of the species. And yung data na dinadala sa Tuna Commission, sa WCPFC, was erroneous. So we had to correct that using this paper. Next, we did a paper on looking at its population, whether the Philippine yellowfin tuna is actually separate from the Central Pacific, and we did find evidence that it's not, there's not much gene flow occurring between the Philippine population and the Central Pacific. Kanya lang, we needed more evidence, we needed more scientists to look at this one. Kasi sa ngayon, ang WCPFC, they consider them as one big stock. We did record the first Pacific bluefin tuna in the Philippines in 2016. We knew that there's the bluefin tuna. By the way, bluefin tuna is the most expensive fish right now. Before I see in the markets of Japan auction, they say it's 100,000 species, $100,000 per piece. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I saw like $1 million per piece because it's so rare now, this Pacific bluefin tuna. And one time they asked me in the Department of Agriculture, so how much is the potential of this one? Una, ang nakakapag-exploit po nito ay hindi Pilipino at karamihan. Sino po? By the way, nakikita po ito sa Northern Philippines, no? Yung mga Taiwanese. Ayan. And they use the long lines. We don't have that technology yet, the long lines to go there. And makakatch ka nito ng isang piraso na lang sa isang week with a $200,000 worth of fish. Pwede ka nang hindi magtrabaho for the next 3 years. Kung gagamitin mo lang yung standard of living in the Philippines. Okay? Unfortunately, it's other nations which are exploiting this one, not the Philippines. We did look at this labeling. In 2013, it's the first time we published that the labels in some of the supermarkets in Manila are inaccurate. For example, this one, we published this in Food Control in 2013. Yung bluefin tuna nakalabel is actually long-tail tuna. Bakit nila binibenta ng bluefin? Siyempre, mas mahal. Diba? Okay. Shipments, confiscation, we also helped in that one. In 2014, the customs in Manila North Harbor sent us samples, sharks, bones, and skins. And we found out that the manta ray, the oceanic, the devil ray, is included in the shipment. And so, nadagdagan yung kaso nila kasi protected at bawal ang manta rays. This is the one that Daryl mentioned. We collaborated on this one. We published this in 2015. The first record of Mesoplodon mutaula in the Philippines. This is the only the 8th. Second? Sorry? Yeah, this one. In the whole world, not in the Philippines, in the whole world. And Daryl has the complete, both, the complete specimen. Yung ibang countries, ulo lang, yung ibang countries, ibang bone lang. So we published this one in 2015 together with Daryl. We also did some zoonotic parasites with Karl Marx Piazon of CLSU. We do see a lot of, parasites in our tunas, like this one, the skipjack. So, This is another paper that we published recently with NOAA looking at skipjack tuna spawning habitat due to changing or increasing temperature. And what we see is that by 2025, we start to see declines in spawning of skipjack because their spawning habitat is already changing. Nakalimutan banggitin ni Sir Kay doon sa paper ni Roland. Actually, yung mga species na walo ba yun, Sir Kay? 8. Yung huli doon, yung liplipan, the swordfish. They said, Roland said, based on their prediction, they will disappear by year 2050. Ano nung year na tayo ngayon? 2019 to 2029. 30 years na lang because of climate change. So magbilang na po tayo. And we did, of course, some vulnerability assessments to climate change, and we found that the general Santos fisheries, the tuna fisheries, have a regional vulnerability, and it's because their adaptive capacity is very low. So what now? A lot of work has been done. I just wanted to say that marami na pong mga management plans. The Philippines, the Filipinos are very good at formulating and developing plans. Ano pong kulang natin? Implementation. Now, saying we do have a national tuna management plan, nakalagay na po doon lahat ng kailangan natin gawin. We know what to do, we know how to do them. The problem now actually, who's going to do them? And then that's my point. Sharks and rays, we do have a national plan of action for sharks and rays. It's there, it's published, you can download that easily. And if you want to work on something, on research, nandun na. Ito nandun na yung mga priorities and things that we need to do. Very recently, a law was passed, again connected with the large oceanic pelagic species, the FAO 263, which is the establishment of the fisheries management areas in the country. We sort of demarcated the country into 12 FMAs. Bakit merong 12 FMAs? It's because we're now going into ecosystem approach to fisheries management. By policy, ganito na po yung approach ng WFAR in terms of managing our fisheries resources. And mainstreaming that is about ecology now, about human well-being, about ecological well-being, and about governance. And if I may add, we do have EFM, but we now need to incorporate also in that CCDRRM, climate change, disaster risk reduction management. Meron tayong batas mandating us to mainstream here also gender and development. And of course, we really need science, technology, innovation to have that successful fisheries management. With that,